let's talk about a interesting thing found in a bunch of bacteria. So this is a bunch of gram-negative bacteria. I don't know the exact species, I just looked up gram-negative bacteria, but gram-negative bacteria, which I've said like 8 times, are a classification of bacteria that stain red using the gram staining technique, as opposed to gram-positive bacteria, which stain purple. If you're familiar with microbiology, you know all this shit, but essentially this is because the gram-negative bacteria don't have the super thick cell walls that hold on to the purple stain, so they stain red instead. Now, what the gram-negative bacteria do have in place of this super thick cell wall are these things called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. This is kind of just a vague diagram of the entire lipopolysaccharide, but the part we're talking about that's extra interesting is down right at the bottom, lipid A. So, normally in bacteria, these lipopolysaccharides play a more structural role. They don't really do anything, but they can also, when a bacteria enters the body, they can become agents of pathogenicity. Basically what that means, it helps... There's sounds. It helps the bacteria with being a pathogen better, which is good for the bacteria but bad for the host. So these LPSs, they act as something called an endotoxin, which you may have guessed from that lovely term, is not a great thing. This helps the bacteria. It causes an increase in inflammation, but not in the way that the host cell likes, so it helps the bacteria spread easier. So, I think yesterday I made a video about cytokine storms and how those are a problem. So, excess of these endotoxins can help to trigger a cytokine storm, which, if you watched my previous video on that, is not good. So that is very interesting, but something I find particularly fascinating with these is sometimes the use of antibiotics against bacteria that have these LPS can actually make your infection way worse. So these lipopolysaccharides are contained within the bacteria, like outer membrane. They're like the very outer bits. And there are some antibiotics where their mechanism of action involves lysing the cell, so basically just causing it to burst, which usually kills the cell. Okay, not usually. It kills the cell, but sometimes when you use the lysing antibiotics, it can actually cause a release of these LPSs, particularly lipid A, which then act as the endotoxin. They cause all sorts of problems and can actually make your infection way worse. So in the cases of bacterial infections that are caused by these gram-negative bacteria that have these lipopolysaccharides, you have to make sure when, prescribing the correct antibiotics, you don't prescribe antibiotics that will lyse these cells and cause the release of the lipid A's, because that can cause all sorts of problems. So yeah, I just find this very interesting. Usually antibiotics are great, they'll clear infection right up, but watch out, because sometimes it can make it worse if you take the wrong antibiotics with the wrong type of bacteria.